Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. In celebration of National Arab American Heritage Month, we'd like to welcome you all to our panel discussion on Arab American activism. I'm Zara, and I'm honored to be one of your moderators for today's session. I am a fourth-year psychology and communications double major at UC Davis, and I am one of the community organizers at the Manasa Student Resources Center at Davis. I will be co-moderating this session with Dorsa.
Ada, and I'll be moderating this event with Zara. I'm a fourth-year poli-sci major at UC Santa Cruz. I'm a senior SWANA programs intern at the Asian American Pacific Islander Research Center at UC Santa Cruz. So this event is a collaboration across some of the UC campuses that support Middle Eastern, Southwest Asian, North African, and South Asian students, including UC Berkeley, UC Davis, UC Riverside, UC San Diego, UC Santa Barbara, and UC Santa Cruz. We have two wonderful panelists who will be sharing their insights and perspectives with us. Before we get started, we would like to briefly introduce our panelists.
Our first panelist is Sara. Sara Abusa, she/her, is a PhD candidate in epidemiology at UC Davis who is passionate about developing research and pedagogical practice centered on values of justice and anti-oppression with the focus on public health and health systems. She organizes for workplace rights and safety, anti-racism, disability, justice, and public health in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. She has worked with student affinity groups, the Academic Workers Union, and with fellow instructors. Sara is a Palestinian American who aims to embody the resilience and care central to the Palestinian struggle in her work and daily life. She enjoys mint tea, cycling, and reading while snuggling with her cat.
Okay. So our second panelist is Ahmed Anous. Him is a first-generation Arab American with a Syrian and Lebanese background. He's a third-year MCD bio major at UCSC who has always had a deep passion for Arab culture, music, and history, but no one to share it with or no support to be able to do it himself. In high school, he created his own representation by making an Arab club, and despite it being difficult, he pushed through all the trials and abuse from an unaccepting community to create that space for his Arab community. At his campus, he created the Arab Student Union at UCSC to do the same and is currently involved in an Arab clothing brand, Naeem Designs. Ahmed shares his excitement and hope for the future.
Panelists, how are you all doing? Are you ready to get started?
Feeling lovely today. We're ready.
Awesome. Let's get started. So, Sara and Ahmed, we will be asking you a series of questions related to our topic. Please feel free to share your thoughts and insights. And audience, if you have any questions, please drop them into the chat, and we'll try to ask as many as we can at the end of our session. Okay. Our first question is, what was it like growing up in your hometown, or what has your college experience been like in terms of navigating your identity?
All right. I guess I can go ahead. What was it like growing up in my hometown? That's a pretty hefty question there. Multiple identities there to balance. First language I ever learned was Arabic. My mother is Syrian, my dad's Lebanese. They came here as refugees, fleeing Lebanese civil war, and coming to kindergarten and first grade and not speaking English is definitely its own experience, and then having to learn English and forget your first language, and then having your people back home saying like, oh, now you've forgotten us and you've learned English, and jumping between the two, you kind of feel like, no matter what you do, you're always gonna miss either or. Also, I had the identity of growing up as a Muslim and having to explain to friends why I have to do certain things, why I can't do certain things. People, anything that's strange, people would ridicule. So you have to sort of grow a tough skin. I remember, for instance, me and my mother were walking down the street, and someone would come by in a car and just yelling, "Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar," because my mother wears a hijab, and as a young boy, I don't really know how to deal with that. And I have to ask my mom, like, hey, why do people do this? And seeing this clearly being uncomfortable for my mother, and just not having anyone that has a similar experience. So I guess it was a little bit ostracizing, but at the same time, there was beauty in it. We had a different culture that we were able to express within also being in the American culture. So it wasn't all just negatives. It was, we were able to share with people, and a lot of people were positive. And so I think growing up here, for me, I wouldn't change it for the world. It's been a great experience. Go ahead and pass it over to Sada if she's...
Thank you so much for sharing, Ahmed. It sounds like it was difficult growing up, and I relate to not being able to know English while coming into kindergarten. I learned Urdu, Hindi Urdu, and coming into kindergarten, so even I didn't know English, so it was difficult for me as well just to make that transition into a primarily English-speaking school, and the cultural differences as well, and everything that you experienced while growing up. It sounds like it was very difficult, but and it sounds like your culture is a big part of your identity, and building community for your fellow Arab Americans is also really important for you as well. So thank you for sharing. Sada, you're back. Would you like to share as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And sorry about that. I think my internet connection just died for a little bit.
No worries.
But yeah, Ahmad, it sounds like you and I have kind of had similar experiences. I can, definitely relate to this sort of like feeling torn between two identities, where to folks in the US, like you're too different or too foreign. And then when you talk to family, like back in the Middle East, like you're Americanized, you're Westernized, and it feels like you're not, really fulfilling like either one. Like you're not enough for either side. And it can be really challenging for sure. But yeah, I grew up in a really small kind of town. I grew up in Mississippi, in a very like insular, very like religious community. And my parents both came from Muslim families, and the area we lived in was like very, very heavily Christian and not very open to folks with different beliefs. And my parents were also immigrants as well, and so we kind of had the different levels of like practicing a different religion, being from another country, speaking a different language, and then this basically just growing up in an area that like wasn't very accepting and at times like openly hostile. Also had experiences with my own teachers making ignorant comments or preventing me or my brothers from like participating in school activities, and that can be really frustrating, especially when you're a child and you don't necessarily know, you don't really understand why that's going on. And so I think at a young age you kind of have to learn what what discrimination is and how it manifests. And that's something that was challenging to grow up with, for sure. And I had another thought and then I lost it. But yeah, challenging, but I think having support from my family and then being able to kind of forge my own way, especially through college, was really helpful in kind of getting a more solid ground of like what my identity is, and just feeling comfortable with that sort of in betweenness. It's okay to not fall under this totally American umbrella or this like totally Arab, like whatever that means, right? That's something that gets defined depending on the person that you're talking to. So I think just being really comfortable with that and just feeling secure with the things that I like or the things that resonate with me, and not trying to think about it as like, oh, is this quality of mine American? Is this quality of mine Arab? And just kind of coming into this understanding that like, well, I'm an Arab American, so anything I do, right, is something that like an Arab American would do. And so just becoming more comfortable with that over time.
Thank you for sharing. Sounds like it was very difficult for you as well growing up in Mississippi and having to face all of those stereotypical comments. Must have been very challenging. So thank you for sharing, both of you. I'll pass it off to Dorsa for the second question.
Okay, our second question is around activism. What does student activism mean to you? How were you first introduced to it? And or like, how did you first get involved with student activism? Feel free to talk about like some of the issues you and your communities faced or are facing on campus that you worked or are working to address through activism.
Yeah, student activism was, I didn't really mean to become an activist, but I guess my existence means I had to inherently be an activist. So, I guess my activism first started actually in preschool before I even knew what was happening. I went to a Catholic preschool because that's all they had in town at the time, and they would always sing hymns. Why I couldn't sing the hymns, I didn't know, but I had to constantly tell my teachers, like, hey, like, let me chill in the principal's office while this is happening. I'm not aware why, but then this causes like a whole sort of thing within the preschool itself where they have to then now see, okay, how are we going to deal with this? This is new. And they had to change a lot of policies just to accommodate me. So I guess I started activism as soon as I could speak. But once I became to realize it was definitely in high school where I became to realize why things were important and why like my identity is the way it is. And at my high school, I grew up in Stockton, California, which is one of the most diverse cities. I think it's the most diverse city in all of the U.S. So we had this international festival at the end of the year where people would do dances and there would be food and there would be the whole school would have a whole day out for it, and it was a great event. And I was looking for my own group to join, and there was every single other different group there was different organizations for every single other group, but there wasn't one for my own. So I was kind of bummed about it. For a year I didn't join anything. And then I thought to myself, well, like, if there isn't one, why don't I go ahead and do it myself? And that's when I was first introduced to the challenges, I guess, of bureaucracy at the time, where it was paperwork, and a lot of people were just like, oh, this is not really something you can do. You need to be established. You need to have like connections with certain teachers or like with the secretary and things like that. But I guess I sort of had to become an activist to include myself. And through that, I went through all the processes and I got involved. And ever since then, I've really just been doing that subconsciously my entire career forward. So yeah, that's my story with activism. I guess I sort of had to be. Pass it on to Sarah.
Yeah, you actually kind of took the words out of my mouth, right? I think there's this balance of like, okay, you start advocating for yourself in a space where there aren't a lot of people who look like you or a lot of people who come from your same background and like share similar like cultural understandings. And that causes problems for some reason. And it's very confusing because you're like, well, I'm just here. I'm just trying to exist and participate. And that causes problems. And that happens, from a very early age. And then I think, yeah, for me at least, there was sort of, I didn't really understand that as activism or think of it as activism, until fairly recently. I think I had this idea of being, within an institution, being within a college or university, and thinking of activism like along similar lines, right? Like you have to have this established membership or be a part of this group and go through these very specific steps. And over time, what I've learned is that, that is not true. That's not the case, right? So activism can take many forms. And oftentimes, if not most times, if not all of the time, right, you're actually challenging those institutions and those very harsh sets of rules because they're actually built in order to maintain a status quo that necessarily oppresses people who are already marginalized in society. And so that, for me has been like a process of education, right? Like kind of gradually over time, understanding that better. And as far as how I first got involved, thinking about it, I don't think I maybe formally got involved with activism until I got to college, because that was also somewhere where I was starting to understand better, like even just verbalizing, right? Like things like oppression and discrimination and like systemic racism, and like having understood those concepts and having felt them and being able to say, yes, I've experienced this, or I've seen people I care about experiencing this, but not knowing how to describe it and not knowing how to relate it like to broader systems of oppression, especially in like an educational space where for me growing up, for the most part, I felt very comfortable, right? Like I was good at school and I could, you know, just keep getting good grades. And as long as I did that, there was no reason for anybody, you know, teachers or admin or the like to not like me or prevent me from doing things. And I, you know, obviously over time found that that wasn't the case. But thinking of education as not just like this sort of pure ideal space where we all come together to share ideas, but realizing too that like it comes with like the social baggage, right? By being an institution, and figuring out like how do you move safely, how do you challenge the barriers that prevent you and other people who are marginalized by society from moving safely. And honestly, just the sort of basics of getting involved with like these campus committees and things, and then realizing like this actually doesn't do enough. And it seems like people are complacent with like, we had a meeting, we wrote a letter, we presented this cause to this higher up person and they said no, but like we tried, and so we're going to stop there. And so there was this process for me of like participating in those things and like feeling initially like, okay, I'm doing something important, and then realizing like there's so much more space that we could take up, right? There's so much more room. We could go further with this work and trying to sort of break out of those boundaries. Yeah, that was kind of my journey into student activism. And I like to think that I've kind of built upon that, you know, as I moved through college, and now I'm a graduate student approaching the end of my doctoral degree. So I've been in school for a long time. And yeah, just thinking about like student activism as a form of activism. And does that mean like you are a student who performs activism? Does it mean your activism is happening in a scholarly or an educational space? Is it something that necessarily is trying to reform or dismantle aspects of that educational space? So I was thinking about this question before the panel as far as like, you know, what are the different ways you could define activism relative to being a student? And I think there are a lot. But what I keep coming back to is this like idea of an educational space as, you know, the ideal of it, right? And how it's supposed to be, where multiple types of knowledge are like shared and valued on equitable footing, but it's not. And so challenging those structures, I think, has become really central to student activism for me personally.
Thank you so much for your insights. I think I definitely relate to the part about we don't necessarily choose to be asked, just by virtue of being MENA or SWANA people. We're kind of put in the situations where we need to advocate for ourselves, and it doesn't always have to be like a formal process, and that tends to happen later in life, but early on, we just kind of have to be advocates for ourselves and our communities. I'll pass it to Zara for the next question.
Okay, our third question is, what are some common challenges that you faced or are facing while engaging in activism, and how did you overcome them? And despite these challenges, what is one primary factor that interested or kept motivating you to keep engaging in activism?
Okay, so some common challenges for me, it depends on which side are you talking about, because, for example, the Muslim side, we're working on a lot of things like this Ramadan. We're just like, hey, you know, we need a place to pray. And then they're just like, well, you know, you can just, it's not that big a deal. We can give you this little room and it could be near other things. And we have to explain to people why this is important. It's not inherently known why something is important to us. And every time we want something done, we have to fight tooth and nail to show it is important to us and for XYZ reason. And these reasons may not be something that matters to whoever you're trying to convince, but it may matter to you. So now you have the problem of trying to express why you are, you know, advocating for a certain like room or sort of accommodation or whatever it may be. You have to start from zero. You have to explain someone a concept that may not exist here in this society. So, and then on the Arab side, we have other challenges where we have a different way of working over there. Here, we're very heavily around like race and ideals like that. In the Eastern world, it's a little bit different. So the way that people get together is a little bit different. So it's kind of, we're trying to explain that as well, and certain events, and understanding that there's a lot more historical precedence in the Arab world than there may be here. And to understand that for some people is a little bit difficult, and explaining it gets a little bit tiresome. The way I overcame these challenges is honestly just persistence. Like, you have to, my mother always says, yeah, the squeaky engine gets oil. So you have to keep pushing for yourself, and being that maybe sometimes a little bit annoying at times, like little noise to tell people, like, hey, we're a little dissatisfied with this, and they might push you to the side or think it's not that important. Like, for example, the meal plan in Ramadan, they wanted people to pay for the whole month, and we're just like, well, if we only eat one time a day and you're forced to get a meal plan, you don't understand, like, it's only 1 month, we can't just wait for the last week, or every day is very important. So you have to keep pushing, and you have to keep going. And it may feel a little bit daunting at times, like people don't care, or you might feel that you're maybe being a nuisance, but it really is, the squeaky engine gets oil. You have to keep pushing for yourself and keep saying, hey, I'm here. Send that email again. I've requested this. We need this. And eventually people will respond if you put a little bit more effort and persistence, and I think everything will prevail, or at least that has been my experience. But yeah, I guess those are the challenges, and that's how I face them. I'll pass it off to Sada.
Yeah, thanks. And Eid Mubarak. I know it's a couple days late, but for anybody who's been celebrating or who observed, yeah. And you were talking about the thing with the meal plans, and yeah, just kind of thinking about my own experiences where, yeah, being in college and being like, our like dinner hours were before the sun would go down, and so I'd go in and I had to ask, like, can I take food to go? Can I like take food out of here? And they were really understanding about it. But yeah, just those sort of little adjustments that we make a lot in order to like fit in. But then when the dynamic shifts and you actually need to ask for something and you need to ask everybody else to make a change, like the difficulties in that, right? Because I feel like we, at least, for me, have become so accustomed to like, okay, I'm going to minimize myself or change the way that I do something to make, to fit into whatever practices are like common here in the US. And then when you want the practices to actually shift and like be a little closer to you, that can be a lot more challenging. But yeah, so I actually was thinking about, trying to reflect on some of the challenges that I've faced and dealt with, and kind of the two things that came to mind for me really were thinking about burnout and then also discouragement, right? So I have, been involved with a lot of different groups for a while, and I'm very bad at saying no to things. I love to say yes to things, and I get very excited about participating, and I just want to be involved and like see all of these things come to fruition. And so I, especially when I was first starting out, and when I moved to California and was kind of starting fresh in terms of my like social connections, really just overcommitting to things and stretching myself too thin. And so that's something that I've struggled with, and I like to think I've gotten better, but it's still something I try to balance, because yeah, it can be so easy to overcommit, especially depending on the types of causes you work with. When you're working with large groups, if you don't see like a task being taken care of or a spot being filled, there's this sort of inclination to be like, oh well, I'll do it, and you kind of load up your plate, and then you're so tired a couple of weeks later and like don't really realize why. So for anyone who kind of shares that challenge, I think taking a step back to take care of yourself is really important, especially if you're going to take on more responsibility or step into a more formal position. Just really thinking about what your needs are, how much time you can put in, and like what are the signs that you are stressing yourself out too much, or signs that you need to take a moment to take care of yourself. Because if you're not taking care of your health, taking care of your body, that's detrimental for you and also to the movement or whatever cause it is that you're working for, right? It's kind of this idea of like, what is that proverb? It's like, don't set yourself on fire to keep other people warm, right? So you want to make sure that you're taking care of yourself, and that places you like in a better position to avoid burnout, and also to keep participating and building your like strengths, and building solidarity with other folks and other movements. And then the second one is just becoming discouraged, because in activism there are a lot of losses or failures, or things that you don't accomplish on the first try, or maybe several tries later. And I think that is something that's really challenging, because especially for folks who care a lot about activism, and for social causes, we really want to see better outcomes. We want to see improvement. And so it's really discouraging when, you talk to people and they don't care, or you finally are able to confront whatever person or group is like in charge of something, and they just completely shut you down. So I think it kind of overlaps with the self-care a little bit, because after something like that happens, you do want to take a step back, and if whatever it is that you need to kind of bounce back and recover, maybe you do need to grieve a little, maybe you need to mourn a little. I know I've taken time after decisions that, or outcomes that were really disappointing for me. I've taken a couple of days and had like a mourning period before I jump back in, to make sure that I've processed things, and that I actually, am not just trying to push myself through the next thing without resting in between. So I mean, yeah, ways of facing that, I think, are just, again, being familiar like with yourself and what your needs are, having folks that you can talk to and rely on, and lean on. And one of the things that I've really, really appreciated in my time as an activist is like building community across a lot of different movements. And you find people who understand and who have been through those things as well, especially if you talk to activists who are more experienced, right? So I think just being able to draw from the knowledge and the support that's around you, because it's a lot stronger, I think, than it might appear from the outside. And especially when I was coming in as more of a new person, I didn't want to burden people by asking for help or asking for support. But one of the things that's really truly revolutionary, I think, is this love, this sympathy, this empathy that people do really want to give each other, because we want to have a stronger coalition or a stronger group going forward. So it's not just, so there's the very obvious direct piece of not being afraid to advocate for yourself or whatever this cause is, but then also not being afraid to ask for what you need within the movement as well, and what you need from others in order to take care of yourself or to get something done. So yeah, those are two of the things that have come up for me a lot, especially recently. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. From what you've shared, it seems like at times being a student activist can be very difficult and complex, especially when explaining certain aspects of your religious and or cultural identity, like from ground zero, like you mentioned, Ahmed, and just explaining why those aspects of your identity and certain practices are important to you. But then at the same time, there's that struggle of feeling the pressure of just accommodating to others and minimizing your own needs. But it's really inspiring to see how you were able to overcome. I'll pass it. Sorry, my Wi-Fi cut out in between. I'll pass it off to Dorsa for the next question.
Thank you, Zara. So our next question Okay. Our next question is, what advice would you give to other current student activists?
Okay, so for me, actually, just after hearing Sada talking about discouragement and things like that, a quote comes to mind, not one that I remember where it's from or what exactly it says, but it goes along the lines of, the best of men plants trees knowing he'll never sit in the shade. So it's like, we are putting all this effort and challenge, and we probably will not see it come to fruition. But that is not our purpose. Our purpose is to make sure that those who come after us have it easier, have it better. And I would give advice to just push through. You're probably not going to see it during your time. You're going to fight for a specific change. It won't happen for years. If you don't pursue postgraduate, you're at college for what, maybe 4 years. It might take you 2 or 3 years to even have the idea to get involved. So within that maximum 4 years that you're there, there's only so much that can happen. And I would say that you really just have to look at it as I'm doing the best that I can with what I have now in order to make sure that people have the tools to do it later. And again, like Sada said, she's explained it beautifully. That idea of discouragement is always going to be there. So I can't emphasize enough. Just push through and really believe in what you fight for, and all will turn out okay at the end. Pass it on to Sada.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I think kind of continuing along the same theme, right, is making sure that you take care of yourself and your needs. Find your people. That's a really big one for me. Find folks that understand you, where you can support each other. And I saw that there's a question from Gina that says, what are some of your favorite ways to take care of yourselves? And I really like having my alone time to recharge. I like making a large cup of tea, reading a book, doing like Sudoku or puzzles. Something about putting numbers in order just makes my brain like feel at ease. So yeah, just finding things like that where I can kind of decompress by myself is something that's really helpful. Or I'll reach out to like a close friend and just have, a catch-up session on the phone or something. And really anything that helps me kind of reconnect to the rest of my world, right? Because sometimes, especially when there's something really intense going on, whether it's like a protest, a strike, a large action, anything like that, they can be really draining and really tiring afterwards, and even during those processes if it's something that's long term. And it can be hard, I think, because it's not that it's separate from the rest of your world, but when you're engaged in it, I think it can sometimes feel like its own little world. So reconnecting to those other parts of myself is a way that I like to take care of myself. But yeah, just kind of echoing from earlier, making sure you know yourself and your needs, self-care, and yeah, just be really, really in tune for what you're working on. And I also, Ahmad, really like your point about like legacies, right? Like the work that you're doing is not necessarily something you will see the results of, but you want that for people who come after you. And in academia especially, this is an attitude that I've encountered a lot. It's really common of, I suffered, so you have to suffer. So when I've spoken to older graduate students, even sometimes faculty members, who have gone through the similar things to stay in academia, like school is difficult, it has its challenges, but some of those challenges don't need to exist, right? Like there are a lot of issues that are kind of built into the structure of academia that put up barriers, really, and will either cause folks to leave programs, take longer to finish them, even affecting like our health and our stress. Like some of the outcomes, or not outcomes, but consequences that I've seen for, myself, people I care about, people I organize with, are things that are facilitated or created by the university that the university will not solve, right? And so thinking about those things, like you talk to other people who are ahead of you in graduate school or further along in their academic career, and they say, oh yeah, that happened to me too. And it's just a rite of passage, right? Like it's just something that happens. I suffered and I paid my dues, so now you just have to do the same thing. Like, yeah, it sucks, but it's just a part of it. And kind of not going beyond that train of thought. Or seeing outside of that box of actually we can improve things. And even if, I had a hard time with something during my PhD, if I can help chip away at that barrier for someone who's coming after me so they don't have to deal with the same thing, like that's a beautiful thing. So yeah, just keeping that goal of the future in mind, and that you might not immediately see success, but it's a longer project, right? yeah, so don't lose sight of that goal, I guess would be the advice from there.
Thank you both. I think the common theme was taking care of yourself and also being mindful that you might not immediately see the results you want to see, but that's okay because you put in the effort, and maybe the students that come after you, they don't have to suffer like you suffered, and can just, use the tools you put in place for them. I'll pass it to Zara for our next question.
Okay, so our last question that we have for you is, what are your future goals and plans for your activism work, and how do you hope to make a difference in the long term?
All right, so like we were saying, our goal is the long term. So the difference that we want to make in the long term is we just want to make it easier for those who come after us to be able to get their education while also not having to sacrifice any of their cultural or religious aspects, and not have to feel maybe othered by university or the practices that are commonly held by it, just to minimize misconceptions about our community and sort of give the message that, hey, we're here and we need certain things, and we want it to be something that's common and accepted within the cultures of our universities, that they listen to communities that might not be heard to very often, and really take their needs into consideration. My future goal personally is definitely to get my own organization off the ground, to try and do more activism work within the organization rather than just more social causes, something that's going to leave more seeds, like we said. And overall, just have the university support not just the Arab community, but any other minority community, and just to normalize it, really. And that's my future goal.
That's awesome. And yeah, once you get that organization started, maybe hit me up. I'll give you my email after this. We can, figure out some cool collaborative ideas. But so I have been thinking about, as I am finally going to leave the university, I think, like I said, I've been in school for a long time. So once I finish, this will be, I think, the first time that I'm really not in an education adjacent or related position. But sort of thinking about that legacy in terms of, have I gone through this space or, the multiple spaces that I've been a part of, and have I left it better than it was when I came in? Is there anything that I've done, even if it's something small, that's made things better? And I think about this, in terms of the program, my graduate group here in epidemiology. I think about my lab, my specific group of coworkers. I think about the university itself. I think about the vet school, which is where my lab is based. And I think about Davis. I think about the organizing spaces I'm a part of, and have I contributed to this in a way that when I do leave, it is somehow better, even if it's just in the tiniest way. And my work specifically, I'm an epidemiologist. I study public health. And something that's really important to me is basically working through these issues of access, discrimination, and oppression in the institution of public health, of which, the university is a part of. A lot of public health research is done through universities and academic groups, as well as state structures like health departments. And so really critically thinking about how we understand epidemiologic questions, because there's been recently more of a push, I think, or at least from what I've seen in social fields of epidemiology, for that to become more of a broader, all-encompassing thing, and to really think about, when you're addressing a question, to look also at to look beyond the sort of basic factors that we're told to think about, right? And to really examine the history of a particular place or a particular people, and understand the context and all of the various steps that led whatever sort of health issue is occurring. Why is it occurring on a broad scale? And it's often, you don't you only get a very surface level understanding if you're just looking at, things like incidence or prevalence. This is the number of cases of X disease we've had in a year. But if you really take the time to study and get to know the community that you're working with, the results will often be a lot better. And something that I think about a lot as well, I've been, throwing out this word institutions a lot. And, my work in particular, recently, I've been working a lot on access needs and working with disabled graduate student workers, and really focusing on these concepts that come from a movement of disability justice. And so that those are things like leadership, intersectionality, cross-movement solidarity, because we're here, Ahmad and I are here as Arab American students, but we both also encompass many other identities. And our struggles are necessarily like interwoven or bound with the struggles of others whose identities we may not share, we may overlap in different ways, but are still, existing at these like axes of marginalization. So how do we make sure the work that we do is also benefiting across the board, right? Like, are we actually doing one of my favorite phrases, mutual aid, which we love. I found that Davis is a really great place for that kind of organizing. But yeah, looking at this and really committing to not just having a legacy for the future, but also making sure that that's something that broadly increases accessibility across the board. Because you can have, support systems and programs set up, but if they're not collectively accessible to anybody, then they're not truly revolutionary. So this principle of access is something that I really think about a lot, and something that I'm trying to keep centered in my work going forward, whatever that winds up being.
Awesome. Thank you both for sharing. I think it's a great point that you both brought up about focusing on ways on how to help future students in the long term by advocating for them so that they can excel academically and professionally while not having to sacrifice any part of their identity or culture. And it's great to hear that you're planning on continuing your advocacy work as well. That wraps up all of the questions we had for you. Thank you everyone for such a great discussion. Now let's turn to our audience questions. Okay, so our first question, what are some of your favorite ways to care for yourselves?
Honestly, it depends what I'm caring for, but typically a nice cup of coffee and Feiruz and some friends will work. But it really just depends about the stresses of the week or whatever the specific challenge is. Sometimes you just need to take an hour between things to just really recollect yourself and be like, okay, I'm gonna focus in on this. I'm here. I'm gonna do this. You really need that little bit more to push through it. So for me, it really just depends on what it is I'm doing. But yeah, typically just hanging out with friends is perfect for me because I always never have the time to.
Yeah, I think I talked about this a little bit earlier, so I won't say too much. But yeah, generally, cup of tea, some sort of like puzzle, hanging out with my cat. I'm more of an Abdul Halim Hafez person myself, but I do enjoy Feiruz when I'm really like in my feelings. Like, she's very good. If I've had a really rough time, I'll put on some Feiruz. But yeah, just I think, yeah, finding the things that are really like recharging and refreshing is what I try to do.
Okay, so our next question is, what's a project or program you've worked on that you're proud of?
For me, it's definitely the Arab Student Union here. And it depends which hat I'm wearing. Again, if I'm wearing my Arab Student Union hat or my MSA hat. For the MSA, getting a big enough prayer room for Taraweeh prayers, reflection room for all faiths to have a place to pray on campus, which, didn't really exist before. And for ASU, it's just promoting a space for people. There were a lot of people who didn't know anyone of their culture, especially foreign exchange students. and they didn't have a place to go, and they didn't realize there were so many people that really resonated with them. So having that space is honestly something I'm really proud of, and I'm really excited to keep going with it.
That's super cool that you're able to get that up and running. And yeah, the fact that it's like an interfaith space as well. Like, I love to see that, yeah, sort of cross group and coming together for that, like, yeah, shared like spirituality. That's super cool. Yeah, so I have worked on a few educational projects of really trying to reorient the way that scientists are trained to think about our fields, the history of our fields, and our approaches. And so something I'm really proud of is over the last couple of years with some other graduate students being able to get this seminar course off the ground that's been in the works for a while, and it's about colonialism and the history of vector-borne diseases, which is what I study. My work focuses on mosquito-borne diseases, so I study mosquito populations in California. And I was noticing that in a lot of my courses, we get this very basic, like, this European scientist discovered this thing and it's named after him, and like that's all you need to know about malaria or yellow fever or what have you. But we weren't really getting an education about, what was already going on, what types of knowledges existed before colonialism, right? It was as if history just started there, which is not the case. And so I wanted to be able to have a space to talk about that and have that built into coursework, as well as the influence of history on this and how diseases have been used to further narratives of racism, to support colonialism and military campaigns as well, because this is something that, again, we're just like by default not really taught about. And so now that's developed into a seminar course where we talk about a lot of these topics, and it's open to undergraduate and graduate students. And it's just been really great to show up and have these discussions and, have people who are in STEM fields come in and, be able to discuss these sorts of things and see when they're making the connections to things they've experienced in their own lives. And, it's not, it's a work in progress, I feel. And what I'm hoping is after I do leave, that course continues to develop. But yeah, that's something I'm really proud of, that we were able to get that off the ground and get faculty support. And yeah, really, really have these conversations and think about the implications for like how we research now and how that's influenced by these historical practices that we're just sort of taught like uncritically for the most part.
Thank you for sharing our support or join the cause.
Okay, so how can non-Arab people support or join the cause? I'm a big advocate of the idea that an injustice anywhere is an injustice everywhere. It doesn't have to be an Arab cause to help each other. For example, the multi-faith room. Yes, it was the Muslim students who organized to push for it, but now I go into that room and I see people meditating or practicing other faiths, so everyone around benefits. And I've been thinking a lot about the quote. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, the idea that a man is not righteous unless he wishes for his brother what he wishes for himself. So that idea that we wish for each other what we want for our own communities. It's not limited to, I'm an Arab American, I'm going to support Arab Americans. I'm going to simply create spaces for me, and everyone else is something that I'm not thinking about. A lot of our work is something that I believe benefits everyone. Just the idea that when something gets changed within the institution, it usually helps out more than just the group that advocated for its change. So I think just advocating for any injustice, whatever it is, will definitely be supporting our causes along with many others. So yay for mutualism, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, yeah, there's a lot to be said about like the interconnectedness, right, of all of our struggles. But that said, there are definitely some causes that I think are seen like more immediately. They are affecting or led by Arab Americans or other Arabs. But those are also going to be connected to other struggles as well. Like one of the ones that comes to mind for me, especially being Palestinian, is Palestine. And something that's come up with Palestine a lot is that you have, these like structures of apartheid, right? And that's something that has happened before, and like police and military occupation and the terrorizing of some citizens of society, but not others, have happened before. And so seeing the connections between things that happen here, such as police violence against Black Americans, and seeing how that's carried out in similar ways against the Palestinians. There were like some exchanges on Twitter, I think, where Palestinians were saying like, oh, this is like the same tear gas, and so this is how we would like tend to ourselves after like we got this is how we would like clear out our eyes and things like that. So just, I think part of it is like seeing the sort of interconnectedness of those struggles and where they overlap. But that said, I mean, if you're particularly interested in like things that are going on in the Middle East, or just with Arabs in the US in general, checking in with people and trying to figure out like what are those immediate social causes, because I guarantee they're going to be linked to other ones as well, and there's going to be opportunity for like cross movement solidarity or cross pollination there. So showing up for us and we show up for you, that kind of thing.
Thank you both for sharing. The next question is, what are some of your dreams for future Arab American students in higher education?
Okay, my dreams for future Arab American students in higher education is to not have to, again, we keep reading this, not have to worry about their basic needs. Like Sada said, I don't want someone to have to think, oh, man, Ramadan is going to be really tough. I have to find a way to somehow get food to eat. I want it to just be like, oh, Ramadan is on campus. Cool, it's happening. And there's support for that. Or just anything like that. I just want people to feel that they're welcome, that they're not something that needs accommodation and they're not othered. And that would be an ideal world of higher education where everything is already accounted for and people before them have worked for it. So that's my overarching dream I hopefully reach.
Yeah, that was really well said. I think the accessibility piece is really important. I'm just imagining like, oh, like what if you could go to the dining hall for sahur, right? And like everybody's there. Or not everybody, but you know what I mean. Yeah, and something that I think about a lot as well is, this idea of what does it mean for a space to be accessible, and what does it mean for Arab American students to like thrive in higher education? And I think having a very strong like sense of security like in the self and identity is really important. Understanding the history of your community, because people are going to have different experiences with that, right? Like you might be an immigrant yourself, you might be the child or grandchild of immigrants, and I think really understanding your own history, the struggles of your ancestors, and then the history of the place where you currently are, right? And I feel like I keep coming back to this theme of like, all of these struggles being interconnected, and it's because they are, right? So thinking about being aware and also like really embodying this sort of commitment, I guess, to your own communities. And something that personally I dealt with a lot was this like feeling insecure or unsure when like advocating for myself, like, oh, I'm asking for too much, like I'm being annoying, and I want anybody in higher education in the future to not feel that, right? To feel, oh, this is something that I have a right to, and I'm not going to be embarrassed about exercising that. And yeah, I really just want to see, this is not specific to Arab students necessarily, but kind of across the board, folks committed to that accessibility and liberation of education, and thinking beyond like the institution of the academy.
Thank you both for sharing. Our last question is, going off the seed metaphor, are there any seeds that you've seen grow beyond your expectations?
Yeah, definitely. Great example is the ASU here. I wasn't really I wasn't starting it intending to be an activist, and yet here I am presenting for activism. So I guess we're going the step in the right direction. As well as when I first received an email from what I had no idea was before. I got an email from SWANA, the retention center, saying, "Hey, you're a SWANA student. We're just starting up. We want to like give you a survey or something." And I was just like, okay, this is cool. And then we ended up going to SWANACon, which is something that was really impactful for me. And it was all paid for, and people of my background and my experience were there. And that was definitely something that I got to experience. That was the fruition of someone else's work. So we do see those seeds grow, and it is something that happens, and it's very nice to see. So yeah, definitely there is fruits of our labor that we do enjoy.
Yeah, I think in terms of ones that I've seen grow, I think just within kind of my own like immediate academic circles, there's a lot more openness and student support. I used to be involved with our student board in terms of like developing programming and making resources more accessible to students, and not having to have them depend on, the sort of not as reliable sources that are usually the official ones, information that's out of date, that kind of thing. And that's something that still has like perpetuated over the last few years. And so seeing that, be consistent and kind of contribute to this like more open, supportive student culture has been really satisfying. But yeah, I think the rest are still germinating, or tiny seedlings. But that's one that comes to mind that has had some sort of like, some more immediate obvious changes.
Okay, thank you, Sarah and Ahmad, for sharing your experiences with us. We'd like to also express our gratitude to our event organizers, sponsors, and staff for making this panel discussion possible. And thank you both for being here with us today. Thank you to all of you for joining us today. We hope you found this discussion informative and valuable. Don't forget to follow us on our social media platforms, which you can find in the video description for more updates on our future events. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.